Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine Podcast Radio. You're about to listen to a new Redefining Technology podcast. Standing on 2 feet, having dexterous hands, developing a language that allows us to communicate, and the ability to understand abstract concepts. These are all part of the equation of humanity. Still, it is the capacity to create tools and advance the technology that has allowed us to thrive on this planet, and maybe on others. Knowledge is power, now more than ever. Blue Lava is the first business platform for CISOs to manage their security program. Blue Lava guides security leaders to effectively measure, optimize, and communicate their security program with confidence and ease in one platform. Learn more at bluelava.net.
Marco.
Sean, what's going on? Did you find that button?
I found the button, and I read every word of the policy that I just agreed to.
So that you would know what happened when you record a podcast?
Exactly. I know.
Was it easy?
Nanosecond by nanosecond what's happening. It was super easy, and I'm very informed now, and I feel confident in my decision.
Do you feel your privacy is being respected? Or?
Well, the button was there.
Okay, so you pushed it. That was easy.
I pushed it. It was easy. Easy button. We're making fun of this a little bit, but this is a serious topic, and
of course they're all serious.
One that's going to sit in our Redefining Technology bucket of conversations, and it's around privacy. It's around technology, obviously, and more specifically around design. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. For many years, when I was back building products, I got to engage with UX folks and looking at how people think and interact with computers and systems. And it's often easy to forget that, right? We just put words up, we put buttons up, and off we go. So I'm excited to have this conversation with two new guests. We've just met, Stephanie Lucas and Dr. Jen King. Thank you both for joining us for this conversation.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So to share a little bit about yourself. No privacy here.
I was going to say, let's break the ice right now.
Let's.
Who are you?
Yeah, let's get some background for what you are up to, as much as you want to share, and perhaps the connection between the two of you. Why you're together on this episode. Stephanie, we'll lead with you, please.
Awesome. Well, I am extremely excited about this. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I am that kind of, I don't know if it's an anomaly, but I'm a product designer that actually is passionate about privacy. I'm a privacy nerd. I work at LinkedIn. I have worked there for 9.5 years now. And for the last 7 or so, I have been working on the part of our design organization. It's called the Trust Design Team. And so that's kind of a vague kind of all-encompassing word, but it's things like login and settings and reporting and so forth, things that are meant to help our users, who we call them members, feel more confident and be safe. And I was basically this is what was needed when I said I want to get into product design, because I was in advertising design before, and they said, here, do you want to do this? And I said, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And as I got more into the work, I realized how meaningful it was to me, and that privacy was actually, this was like 2014. Privacy really wasn't top of mind in the public, and as I got into it, I thought, this is fascinating. Europe was obviously starting to be very influential in the decisions that product legal teams were having to deal with. And I started getting into it, and then I started becoming that person, the design reviews, putting her hand up and saying, "Have you thought about this aspect of privacy?" So I sort of got that label, and I happily carry it. I met Dr. King in February of 2020 at a privacy industry kind of discussion dinner, conversation dinner. And it was all stemming because the California Attorney General's office had just put out some guidance on this "do not sell my data" quote button unquote. And the button's design was very confusing. And as I posted sort of publicly, and I kind of realized I came out of the gate a little hot on it. Like, when you think about it, regulatory boards don't have designers advising them. That it was confusing. And to my surprise, privacy legal folks that I'm connected with were saying the same thing. And I realized there's a need for a meeting of the minds here. And so that's where I met Dr. King, because she's, I won't speak for her, but kind of in the
There's
same
another great mind. So
Yeah.
let's get into the mind of Jen, Dr. Jen.
Thanks for having me. So I've been working in the internet for a long time. First, back in the days when we had web producers, and when you were a web producer, you did a little bit of everything. And that migrated to being a product manager. But I worked in what we call trust and safety now. Before, we called it trust and safety. And so I always kind of frame that by saying all the bad things we see happening on the internet have been happening for a really long time. So even when I was working industry back in the early 2000s, still a lot of the same stuff. We just didn't have video, is how I put it. And then I pivoted to grad school originally because I wanted to go into user experience design and research. And so I got a master's degree from UC Berkeley, but then was given the opportunity to dive into privacy research in particular, which was already a passion of mine that I developed in grad school. And kind of quickly dropped my plans of going back into industry and ended up focusing on doing privacy research with a very explicit policy component. But from my particular background with this kind of information science, user experience kind of education that I had. And then I actually transitioned into being a PhD student, got my PhD. And so I've now been at Stanford for the past few years. I'm currently the Privacy and Data Policy Fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. But so to that role, I bring this kind of privacy background with that lens of human-computer interaction over it. So I've been, for many years now engaged in research, just trying to kind of understand all the ways that design affects our understandings of privacy, how we actually execute privacy online, and also trying to tie that to real world outcomes. So this isn't usually, I don't do ivory tower research. I focus really much on this kind of pragmatic, like how do we make things better? How do we improve laws if we need laws? How do laws affect how we design things? And so I've really been at that for over a decade. And it's really become, luckily for me, it was the right career path. It's become more and more important and prominent in our discussions, I think, as we've really begun to realize how much design, matters and how much it influences the choices we make online. And so, as Stephanie mentioned, we first really came together over those design changes that were suggested by the California Attorney General. But we've both had a hand in what I would call privacy by design, which is actually a official term of art for quite a while. Her obviously, as a practitioner, and me more on the academic side. But there's been a push to kind of really build in this idea of privacy by design into technology now for really, actually, that's been over 10 years.
I guess we'll talk about this privacy by design, as many times we have cybersecurity conversation and we talk about security by design. Not sure we're there yet, but it's nice to have.
I always question: is it privacy by design or design with privacy? I don't know if that nuance makes a difference.
Well, that's a really
privacy by design is a trademarked term, just so you know.
I'm thinking logically, which one leads, and does that change how it impacts things getting built?
Yeah, and to that point, privacy by design, I think earlier days of that. I think that expression came out like in 2012 or something like that, somewhere way back then. It was more of an engineering kind of framing, and not so much. And this is kind of goes to my point about bringing this sentiment farther forward in the product design, meaning closer to the user in the product planning and design, you know, conversation.
Right.
So yeah, the people say privacy by design, and yet designers aren't schooled, in that historically.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, you say you have a background in advertising. That happened to be part of one of the background that I have myself, and I've been dealing with designer all my life. And when you think about design 20, 30, 50 years ago, you think about aesthetic, you think about presenting a product in a certain way. Then there were product designer that make object to be usable, like easy to understand, easy to handle, and all of that. And then the internet came together. There was a point where, we just projected maybe a brochure was to turn into a website, if you want to talk about design.
Or a flash banner.
Yeah. And then things just escalated because there was so much more that was happening behind the, not in the front, not on the stage, but in the backstage. So, all the advertising change and tracking and marketing and cookies and all of that. And then all of a sudden, even the design itself, it became an instrument of selling, but not just selling for the aesthetic of it or become appealing, but actually starting to get information from the user so that we can use that information and so on. So when I was reading, Stephanie, what you wrote, and the fact that when you think about privacy, probably you don't think about the responsibility of the designer as the first thing that come in my mind. But you also say that's the connection between the user and the product or service that you have. So it doesn't matter how you slice it, there is a role that they need to play there. But are they really empowered with having that role, or are they just executing what the business tell them to do? So let's start from there. Like, how much power do they really have to make a difference, and do they have any?
Yeah, that is the $64 million question. So I'm really glad you started with advertising because, you draw a line through product design and into the current day. At the first bookend of advertising, and we're here now, the one common thread is influence, right? And designers have, because of what they're making. Mike Montero, he's a kind of a design speaker and researcher. I guess his company does research and also design and so on. He's in San Francisco. And he's got this quote that says, "You are responsible for the work you put out in the world." Once it's out there, as a designer, it's out there. It's in the wild. And what's going to happen is going to happen. So we have this influence as designers. And yet, to your point, the influence is the transaction of influence is between us and the users. If you turn around and you look at the influence between us and product leadership, it's a little uneven, right? And that's why, of course, Jen can talk to potential impending regulation and so on, and that would be the hammer. But the designers need some kind of standardized schooling, and I would love to be some kind of a tailored certification process, quite frankly, that's available to privacy, legal, and expected. It's actually a credential that's expected for legal teams because that's where the risk hits the road for the company. But designers need something they can point to and say, here's why. So it's either regulation or it's credentials that they are both hired for and are accountable for in their reviews and so forth. or of a company-wide framework of, we agree that we are going to do this. This is our, our oath, right? Or something. It can't just be this doesn't feel right. They will not win that. The drive for innovation and shipping in the industry and that's their day-to-day, hour-to-hour influence. And so the pressures for them to just, the product person wants to do what's called a dark pattern. They want to sort of put a button or an experience together in a way that makes it hard for the user to say no, or it's the balance of power is not right. The designer can say, this is a dark pattern, and here's why this is not okay. Now, it's not just me saying this. It's that. Yeah. So.
And Jen, I want to turn to you and talk about the process with which products get developed, and then try to understand where legal fits in here. Because Stephanie says legal should be part of this; they should be certified. And I'm trying to think. In my product development experience, legal is hardly ever part of that. The product requirements document comes together. It says we want to accomplish these things. It's going to fulfill these business objectives. The engineers run off and build something. Maybe they have an architect that looks at something big picture. They build something, and then in there, somebody gets tasked with presenting all that data that they created with systems underneath in some UI. And where does legal and privacy fit into that conversation? My experience is that it very rarely happens, and if it does, it's probably going to happen at the end and forgotten.
Right. So Stephanie said earlier in mentioning privacy by design that it was originally kind of thought of as like an engineering practice, and she's absolutely right. And it's been a long evolution to get it more than just kind of thinking about privacy engineering. And I have kind of firsthand experience with exactly what you described. I worked at Yahoo for a number of years, although I was more on the security side for a while. And, I remember many battles being fought over making sure security reviews happened far sooner in the process than the week before product launch, right? And the whole emphasis of the privacy by design methodology, which I think it's fair to probably call it a methodology at this point, is to really try to focus on making sure that privacy is a topic, which I think today you could also supplant by saying ethics, because it's not just privacy. We're also seeing the same discussions around ethics happen, if not at every stage of a product development process, but much, much earlier on, at the conception stage and not at the end point. The first settlement over privacy by design that was negotiated by the Federal Trade Commission, which is our primary regulator here in the US, was over Google Buzz. And I don't know how many people even remember Google Buzz at this point, which was the early kind of messaging application that you used through Gmail. But the questions in that case weren't about the visual design. It wasn't about what we're talking about right now, which is much more about actually dark patterns and visual design things. But it was about the actual architecture of that project and the fact that Googlers seem to have really only tested it internally. And so once they actually pushed it out into the world as a live product, suddenly all these vulnerabilities became just glaringly clear. With seeding a communication tool with everybody who's on your contacts list or even your recipients list in Gmail, suddenly it was like, wait a second, I don't want my therapist knowing I'm online, or there were so many really just crazy examples of kind of how the real world clashed with these kind of product design ideas. And so just to say that it's part of this is really about shifting the focus and kind of expanding the scope of responsibility for when we build products, like what do we think they're going to do in the world? And my sense is that this is a huge cultural shift that needs to happen. And I can tell you from being in academia and specifically being at Stanford, some of the ways we're seeing that develop is, for example, there's much more of a focus on ethics these days on campuses in terms of educating computer scientists specifically about ethics, which I don't think was even on the table 10 years ago, or even, certainly not even before that. There's just a big cultural shift in kind of realizing that it's not enough just to know how to build things. It's not enough just to have the technical background. You really have to actually understand the societal impact of what you build. And that's It's also true for the design community. I mean, it's not just a technical problem. And so, and I think Stephanie is absolutely right in pointing out that designers are not often the central source of power especially in big companies. So, to the extent that we can build things outside of in the profession that kind of help people be able to, point to these tools and say, hey, I can't actually, like, we have a designer's code of ethics. I can't violate that, even if you want me to, I think is really helpful. But certainly, I think your original question, it also comes down to the size of the company, right? I mean, I've worked at startups. I'm presuming you may have worked at startups, and we know that startups don't have those processes in place, and that I think is one of the biggest friction points. Is that the different methodology? I don't know if I'd call it a methodology, honestly. The way we see tech companies evolve, especially here in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of pressure to change that. Even if you're a small company that's just a couple people getting off the ground, I don't think there is any more patience and kind of a sense of forgiveness if you break all the rules and get something out there that ends up having, extreme societal impacts.
And it's for me, it's a question of what are the rules, either legally or ethically, and who's responsible for for managing two of those rules, and who's going to make the call to say this isn't good, and I don't know if it relies on the designer. What do you think, Marco?
Well, I think we have to look at it from a philosophical perspective, because in the end, Jen, you said, you bring some example that we find ourselves in a situation that we didn't foresee. That's for sure. Like what Google was trying to do. Well, I mean, we can go all the way back at the beginning of the internet. Right. But it wasn't even thinking about security, even less privacy. We were just like, oh, this blinking light is amazing. Let's jump on it. Let's go for a ride. And then we find ourselves where we are. But in a way, things have changed. So I like your perspective too. You mentioned cultural switch. I think cultural change and what happened in our society, and how maybe even the meaning of privacy now is not what we used to think about privacy before the internet. So maybe a couple of observations there so that we can start understanding what is driving what. Is technology driving society? Is society driving technology? And changes take time. I know that.
Right. So I think that there has been, for a long time, we talked about privacy on the internet in terms of honestly shopping. I feel like a lot of our discussions have been framed around advertising and shopping. And one of the biggest changes in the last 5 years, and I think there were a couple of turning points. One was Edward Snowden's, revelations from his whistleblower leaks of documents that he had from the NSA, which kind of showed just to the extent to which the government was actually surveilling, everyday consumer behavior online. And the second is Cambridge Analytica, which again was a watershed moment for a lot of people, and I think for politicians specifically, because then it became clear this isn't just about trying to understand who you are as a consumer so I can target ads. Like, this was about getting in your head and not only trying to understand like your motivations, your emotions, but for politicians in particular, there are direct implications for voting and democracy. And so like that really was a game changer. And I feel like it's interesting to me that there's still a bit of pushback, I think, from the tech sector and thinking that these things will just kind of go away and people don't really care anymore. Like, no, it's the game has changed, and people have realized that the extent to which privacy matters is that it's not only, again, about what products are being pushed to me. There are many more deep implications throughout society in terms of discrimination, in terms of bias, in terms of just our civil rights. And again, it's this kind of interlocking web of both how much the government, not just the US government, obviously, but around the world, how much governments play a role in trying to understand what we do online, but also the depth at which companies collect data about us and our behavior and use it broadly. And so I think it used to be a much more it was an argument that we could, or it was an understanding that we could kind of hold at a distance and say, well, if I'm not, again, if I have nothing to hide, which is an argument we hear very often, if I'm not doing anything quote unquote wrong, I don't care if companies know what I'm doing. They're just going to show me an ad. And if I don't want to see the ad, then I just don't look at it, or I don't click on it. And I think, like, for example, one of the things we see with dark patterns, which is the topic that Steffi and I have really worked on together, is that it's not just about showing you ads. It's about, really constraining your design choices so that we get the outcome from you that we want, that we can, in fact, really constrain what you do in order to manipulate you into signing up for that thing or consenting to give out that information without giving you any real choices. And so I think it's a question of control and power in a way that for most people it seemed very extraneous before, and now it's become much more like relevant in your everyday life in ways it wasn't 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it's funny, just a quick comment is, by saying funny, I'm being sarcastic, of course, but when you say, everything was driven by selling a product, but people maybe forget, and Stephanie, you may, I'm sure you know this, but advertising agency were the one doing political campaign. I mean, the system is that's the manipulation, even in a good way, without having all that data. But now we have so much data, so much influence, so much, way to leverage the bubbles and the social media and all of that it's just crossed the line, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it kind of ties into what I wanted to tag on to what Jen said too. About macro forces and how they drive these kind of trends. That whole political advertising thing is definitely hugely influential. But what I was also going to say is that there's tension, obviously, between innovation / go-to-market, or as Marco, you put it, the blinking light, and thoughtful, ethical and conversations around privacy. There's a tension there because it takes time to figure out what could go wrong, right? And my observation in terms of the industry, if you look at the IPOs in 2021, they're up 191%. Coming out of the pandemic, there's a huge new wave of innovation and push to go to market. And I think that's a macro force to keep into mind too, because companies are like, there's all these opportunities, there's all these new methodologies that we've discovered and are marketable, and all these new kind of parts of the gig economy, all these different apps and so on. There's a rush to be the first, right? So that's where that's where we have to go. Okay. Step back and go, what are the problems we're setting up for ourselves here in another rush to go to market with new solutions? So it's something
that you're driven by collecting as much information from as many users as possible. Right?
Correct. And that's why I feel that, data is such just an absolute DNA of everything we do anymore that, and Jen, I'm so glad you brought up ethics. That's because ethics, I think, is probably being introduced to higher education for designers because I know for one, 2018, I went to like I either spoke at or went to like 6 different industry events in the summer of 2018 about ethics. I mean, that ethics are definitely part of the conversation. I would like to see privacy by design become equally important in the schooling of the day-to-day designer. And understand why, what GDPR is about, and the whatever cobbled together U.S. privacy regulations are, and that kind of thing, and just be understanding that the product strategists and designers have power to take this thing one way or the other.
And maybe we'll get to this as we get toward the end of what that power means. What do they do with it? Before we get there, though, you both have mentioned this concept of dark patterns, and that's something new to me. Maybe others listening have heard of that and familiar with it. But Who can describe to me what dark patterns are? Are those purposely created, accidentally created? And what's the impact of a dark pattern? Maybe some examples.
I'll let Jen
Stephanie,
go.
why don't you go first?
Okay. I was going to say that, Jen's, affiliated with Stanford, and they're doing very thoughtful work about research, but about internet security and safety. A huge amount of thinking coming out of there right now. Earlier, towards 2010 or so, there was a lot of discipline being taught called persuasive design, and it became all product designers and product managers, want to talk about, like how you can persuade people to do this thing that your product goals are calling for. And because we hadn't experienced the bad stuff that we've experienced, since, everybody thought this is awesome. This is the magic wand, right? And there's even a book literally called Evil by Design. It's still selling really well. Jen's nodding. And dark patterns is a spectrum of ways to convince your user to do the thing that you back here behind the curtain know you want them to do. If you go to any kind of a booking site, it's like, 5 other people are interested in this room. Better hurry, or time's running out on the little, just like there's a timer, which, I think it's been proven a lot of those are just completely bogus. So and Tristan Harris did some talks about this. You can find his stuff on YouTube, talking about the imbalance of power. Like we know what we want the users to do. We're not going to tell them. We're just going to set it up so it's very likely that they do it. And then I'll throw it to Jen because she's much more articulate than me.
Not at all. You nailed it, honestly. But I'm trying to figure out if there's anything I want to add to that definition. So dark patterns have been around for a while. It's just that they're becoming much more common. And I think Stephanie's right in identifying the whole kind of persuasive design movement is, I think, really the precipitating event that really drove a lot of them forward. And it went from, I think, ways of nudging, and that's a word that the audience might be familiar with because we've talked about nudges in a lot of different contexts. We have a lot of positive nudges that we talk about in the world, such as the classic example is that we sign you automatically up for a 401k account, and you just take the money out automatically so that you don't even think about it. You don't necessarily miss the money, as a way of increasing your savings for retirement. That's framed as a positive nudge. But what we have seen is a evolution from, let's just try to get people to, do this thing, to designs that kind of foreclose any other outcomes other than you will sign up for this thing or you will have this item put into your shopping cart. You have no choice. A lot of these, I think, are hard sell tactics, and it's just we saw hard sell tactics in the offline world, and we're seeing them translate into the online world in these really explicit ways. But they used to be, I think, much more rare, and now there are industries where you just can't get away from them. Travel, I think, is one of the most recent culprits, where it doesn't matter if it's a hotel site, an Airbnb, whatever it is. They are just now pervasive in terms of. Stephanie mentioned one of the social proof ones. 9 other people are looking at this offer, limited time. You better get it now. Other people, it will go. But we see things. There are obviously ones that are just outright deceptive, things that are untrue. Things that are really push people to do things in a way that is just blatantly unfair. And when regulators decide to crack down on them, it's usually they usually win those cases. The harder areas are what we call just the gray areas of things that seem like they're kind of manipulative or pushy, but aren't necessarily out and out illegal or not maybe plainly deceptive, but give you that icky feeling. That's an area where it's much harder to try to figure out what to do with them.
I cannot think about subliminal advertising, and
yeah, my parents had that book.
and the never-ending
classic 70s subliminal advertising book.
Yeah, there's the famous funny quote that say, "I saw a subliminal advertising executive once, but only for a second." Like
Right.
what we don't even know if it ever worked, but that's a sign that there's always been this desire to find a way to manipulate, to sell something. Let's look into the future maybe, and how there could be, I'm guessing, I'm hoping, a solution for this if we really as a society move into a more ethical behavior online, if we value privacy, and if, as it is happening, companies are starting to attribute a brand value to privacy as well. And then who is empowered to actually bring these ahead? Is it really, Stephanie, is it really the designer that should be the one carrying this hot stone, or is the entire system that needs to change? And how do you see things changing?
Well, as far as the future is concerned, I would like to say the future is private, to quote somebody. But then Facebook comes out with the Ray-Bans with the camera. And I go home and I open a can of frosting and cry into it.
That image will stay with me.
U.S. privacy comprehensive omnibus regulation would be a great start. Let's see Jen's reaction to that. That is just so hard to imagine right now. We have 3 entire states, after having gone through this for like 5 years, that actually have privacy laws now. Only 47 to go. And you can imagine how much fun that is for legal teams to navigate. Innovation and convenience are very, very, very alluring. We did some research projects, I remember, a few years back, and talking to residents of China, there was just not this need for privacy. Like, it's just not. And so, like, the appetite has to be there a little bit. People need to demand it. But look at Facebook's stock. It just keeps going up higher and higher and higher. So, regulation would be the hammer that would settle that once and for all. I mean, GDPR was a huge influence. It just sweeping, because companies that did any business in any part of Europe, regardless of where the company is located, had to pay attention to that. And so they just said, we're just going to do the. A lot of companies just said, we're just going to make this compliant with GDPR no matter where it is. So that just it was a huge, huge shift. Regulation works. Consumer demand for privacy is just not uniform right now. So that's really tough. And like I said, the macro forces driving a go-to-market with the newest shiny thing. They just keep, raising their head and owning the conversation. So I think it's going to be incremental. I think it's going to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I think there will be some kind of. We'll see what the FTC, and what the U.S. government can do. But that's like 5 years out. I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
It's overnight.
Save me, Jen.
Legislation.
I can add a couple.
Jen, I want to
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, please.
I was just going to say, first, designers can't do this on their own. They just can't. We need baseline legislation that, sets the rules of the road and puts, some practices out of reach, and, puts strict rules around how information is collected, how it's used, and so on. I think that's just fundamental at this point. And I actually don't think that many companies would push back that hard against it. I think an important piece of this, there's kind of 2 other pieces though I would raise. One is the question of privacy from whom, from whom are we protecting ourselves? And I think that's useful when you look at some of the kind of privacy competitive practices that you mentioned in the marketplace. A lot of those are actually, if you kind of start to dissect them, it's not about protecting you from the companies. It's more about protecting you from the government, for example. Not that that's not a good goal, especially if you are in a country that's extremely repressive. But don't confuse those efforts in terms of making a difference on consumer privacy and kind of protecting you from what companies are collecting about you. So that's just one quick point. The other is that so much of the focus, even of the GDPR, and especially so with our newer law in California, is on the individual. And yes, these different laws give us rights that we didn't have previously, and that is a net positive, but there's still a focus on you have to figure it all out. You're the one who has to make demands for copies of your information. You're the one who has to make deletion requests. In the California law, for example, doesn't set these kind of broad baselines around what practices companies can do. They just have to basically, again, tell you what they're doing and give you a way to say, oh no, don't sell my information. But it's all dependent on you. And one of the things looking forward that I think is a real risk with doubling down on these very individualistic laws is that we are entering an era where data at scale is going to be even more valuable potentially than it has been to date, especially given the advancements we will probably see in artificial intelligence. And the allure of capturing as much data as possible across the data ecosystem that pressure will continue to be there. And so if we don't come up with laws that also deal with what I call collective privacy and collective privacy problems, things that we just can't solve individually, we will continue to see companies like Clearview AI, for example, pop up because the incentives are such that it makes so much more sense for them to just scrape as much data as they can rather than actually have a way to meaningfully engage with people and ask them to consent into these systems. And I'm not sure who would actually ever meaningfully consent into participating in Clearview's database. I'm sure there's some people, but just to say that their business model, I think, actually makes sense given what the landscape looks like today. And I'm just concerned that most of the laws we're considering passing still don't grapple with that problem.
And that's why I think there needs to be tailored training for designers, because this is a very fluid, dynamic situation. It's very complicated. So I would love to see something created so that product designers and managers just know the rules of the road, and then they can act responsibly.
I love that, Stephanie. I was actually gonna bring that up as we wrap here, because I think what I'm hearing is we need a champion for the user, for the citizen, the consumer, whatever you want to call them. And I think that the UX, the UI is where the product, the application, the system, whatever it is, interacts with that individual. And so therefore, I think the UX designer, product owner, they're really the champion for that individual, in my opinion anyway. And to your point, Stephanie, if we can educate them on what it means to have privacy so that they can define and build and then design the product with that in mind by design, that's a good step forward. And then if we can then wrap that where we have some other nets of protection, if you will, underneath from government and from other nonprofit agencies or whatever it might be that are on the lookout for the consumer, then I think we have a better chance there as well. But I think, as with most of our conversations, maybe a few questions answered, many more raised. Hopefully we get folks to think about this. That's our main objective: raise awareness, get people to think. If anything, take some action to take the first step to figure out what you need to do next. Stephanie and Jen, I want to thank you for being part of this. We'll share Jen's article and other research and other materials you think would be useful to share with our audience as part of the show notes here. So we'll collect that from you and share that. Anything else, Marco?
Yeah, there is a big button so you can subscribe to the podcast. And there is only probably 9 subscription left. So if you need to jump on it right now.
People are already...
only 8 now. Only 8 left.
Sorry, I brought the advertiser in me. No, I love this conversation, and I think there is so much more that we can dig in the future as well. So we'd love to have you back, and maybe we focus on one of the many aspects of this.
Absolutely.
This issue between technology and society. So thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. It was really fun talking to you guys.
Blue Lava is the first business platform for CISOs to manage their security program. Blue Lava guides security leaders to effectively measure, optimize, and communicate their security program with confidence and ease in one platform. Learn more at bluelava.net. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Technology podcast. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.